Welcome to Idea to Investment, the podcast where we dig into the exciting world of entrepreneurship and investment. We tell the stories of the tech creators doing innovative work and the investors who back them up. Along the way, unveiling the fascinating journey from the birth of an idea to scoring crucial investment. We'll highlight the voices of entrepreneurs, showcasing their grit and creativity, all while gaining insight from the investors who believed in those dreams. Get ready to be inspired, stay informed, and stay tuned as we explore the awesome collision of ideas and investments. Idea to Investment is sponsored by TD Ferreira Wealth Advisory Group.
My name is Saumik Biswas. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tenomix.
My name is David Koehler, and I'm the Director of Fund Operations for FACIT.
Well, I thank you both for joining me. And on Idea to Investment, we always start off with the pitch. So, Saumik, why don't you start off with giving us the 60-second pitch?
Absolutely. So my team and I, we're building a company called Tenomix. And at Tenomix, we're building global platform technologies that automate pathology workflows in cancer diagnostics. And one of those issues is a massive problem in the bottleneck process in the cancer staging pathway for colon cancer patients. And this current process involves a manual search for lymph nodes in surgically removed cancer tissues. Now, this process that we've interviewed many doctors across the world with have mentioned it's a super time-consuming, expensive, and unreliable process. And what my team and I are doing is building an automated solution that uses robotics, ultrasound imaging, and AI. And our biggest goal is to automate this process so that it can essentially allow for better lymph node detection and automation.
Sounds like absolutely important technology. David, you have probably heard that pitch a few times, but think back to the first time you heard that pitch. What was it that stood out and made you think that you would like to connect with Tenomix?
Well, every year FACIT holds a pitch competition called Falcon's Fortunes, and we receive written proposals from startup companies and academic groups across the province of Ontario. And we go through those proposals and we select 6 groups to present to us in person at our Falcon's Fortunes event. And Saumik's academic lab was one of the ones that won one of those 6 spots to come and present to us. So we have this event where we have a panel of expert judges, and then at the end they will award a prize to the winner. But importantly for us, it allows us to see new technologies and interesting things going on in Ontario that we might not otherwise be aware of. So oftentimes, and as happened in the case of Tenomix, we'll follow up with the groups after the competition and say, hey, you know, we really loved what you presented here. Maybe you should consider applying for a grant.
So, Saumik, how has your pitch changed since that first few times that you have done it? Has it evolved at all for you?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, Ken. It has definitely evolved, but what I would say is during that time we pitched at the competition, we weren't a company. And actually, our company started during this medical innovation fellowship program at Western. So we were actually trying to figure out the fundamentals of a successful pitch. And by participating in the competition, we were really able to perfect and build on the fundamentals of explaining our problem in a very lay manner, explaining our solution, which at the time was an initial early concept. So the one thing we had to really figure out is how do we disclose something that we haven't protected yet, right? And present it in a very high level. And then obviously talk about the business model, the market opportunity, the team. So I think the FACIT competition actually helped build the foundation of our pitch. And looking back at our current pitch right now, I think we've perfected it now. And again, those building blocks were built in those early days.
I think it's really interesting too that you mentioned that how important it was to make it so that it was so that the average layperson could understand what you were talking about. Was that a challenge for you? Was it difficult for you to, as a researcher and a scientist, to bring that down to a level where a layperson could understand A, what you were talking about, and B, why this was such an important thing to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Ken, and I'd love to hear David's perspective because I mean, he's been on the other end of us presenting. But I would say for us presenting at a very lay manner, it comes pretty naturally for me, because what happened was growing up when I was 7, 8-ish, my younger brother was diagnosed with this rare condition called fibrous dysplasia, and he had to get this very complex surgery at Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. And my parents, who don't have a medical background, my job was to really research this condition and explain it to them at a lay manner. So I was able to build on those skill sets over many, many years. So it comes naturally to me, at least. And I think it's important because not everyone may have a medical background. And it's our job as entrepreneurs in the life science space to make things crystal clear. And I think that translates into a lot of the decisions we have to make in the business about communicating clearly on KPIs, certain milestones, and how we're going to get there.
Yeah. Okay. So, David, from your perspective, how important was it for all of that information to be crystal clear for someone who may not have a really deep understanding of the scientific importance of what Saumik was talking about?
Yes, it's critically important because even though a lot of people in the room at the Falcons Fortunes events have a science background, you have to be able to distill your idea down to a 10-minute pitch. And when you're dealing with a lot of highly technical, complicated information, it's very, very difficult to distill that down to a 10-minute pitch. And one thing that we do every year is that we hire a consultant independent of FACIT who works with the 6 finalist teams before the pitch competition to help them refine their story, polish their pitch deck, and make sure that they can give the clearest possible 10-minute pitch.
Saumik, I can imagine that having that was probably an invaluable resource for you to kind of find, get that pitch right down to like fine tune it, right?
Absolutely, Ken. And one of the biggest things with our team and why I like to think we're so awesome is we're always trying to get feedback to iterate on the things that we're working on. And I remember during that pitch competition, we had several other mentors as well that we would practice the pitch, mentors with different backgrounds, like in engineering, maybe in the business space, in non-medical industries. So that gave us a really good idea on the information that we were presenting and whether it made sense. So extremely invaluable, as you mentioned, that type of feedback.
So, David, let's take a step back a little bit and talk a little about the foundation of FACIT and the background of FACIT.
Yeah, sure. So FACIT started as a spin-off from the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, which is a provincially funded research institute located in Toronto. And FACIT was originally created to help commercialize technologies through supporting grants and then later investments to academic groups and startup companies around Ontario. So we operate 2 main funding programs. One is a grants program, and the other is an investment program. And it's kind of interesting because we have a hybrid funding model where we receive a grant from the province of Ontario to support our grants program, but then we also have a pot of money that we have saved from our private investment returns. And so it's almost like a pseudo venture capitalist type of model where we have a fund of money that we can then deploy to fund new startup companies, and then a certain portion of those startup companies will be successful and they'll be bought out or they'll go public, and then we take those investment returns and we put them back into the pot and use those to help support more companies.
So, Saumik, Tenomix has grown substantially in the last few years. What do you think are the different challenges that you have faced, specifically when it pertains to raising investment as an early stage venture?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken. I think in our early days, we did quite well with grant funding, some non-dilutive sources. And that was a huge part of our journey because we were trying to de-risk multiple components of our business. And as many folks may know, when you're raising capital, investors are always analyzing various dimensions of your business, and they're trying to figure out what risk areas do you still have and what risk areas have you mitigated. And what we've been really fortunate is when we raised our first round in 2023, we were raising over a $2.1 million round, and parts of that process really required having strategic investors and investors that knew us, that have built a trust with us. And FACIT was one of those key players because they saw our progress before our company was formed. We acquired that one grant through FACIT. We've hit all our milestones out of the park. So FACIT knew right away that these guys are serious. They have a real problem. They have clinical validation. So they participated in our round. And that confidence translated to having other investors join our round. And since then, I would say we're super fortunate to have some amazing strategic investors in our first round. And we've been able to accomplish a number of milestones, from successful clinical collaborations with some of the leading hospitals, filing our IP on our on our core technology, and just actually getting notice 2 weeks ago that our patent will be granted in the US, which is huge. We've been able to do a ton of product validation on our technology with hospital end users, growing our team substantially, being recognized in multiple media sources, and then also developing our product. So we're one step closer to market. So basically where I'm going with this is this initial investment really helped continue building the foundation of our business and continue de-risking multiple parts of our business as well in parallel.
Well, congratulations on that patent. That is definitely a huge thing. And David, as one of the early investors, in fact, your involvement with Tenomix predating the company's foundation, what qualities generally, I mean, this is a unique situation, but when we talk about early investment, what qualities do you assess within a company, particularly when it's early on in those development stages?
Take a multi-faceted approach. We look at the technology, of course. We look at whether they're addressing an unmet need, whether there's a potential market for the technology. Of course, protection of intellectual property, patents can be very important. And we also look at management. Oftentimes, these early companies have management teams that are untested. It might be their first company. And so we want to see a team that has good advisors and enthusiastic, competent management. And over the years, we've learned that the management team is equally as important as all the other factors put together. You really have to have a dynamic and competent team, and a team that knows that they can fill in gaps with consultants and other advisors as needed to round out the whole company.
It occurs to me that first and foremost, just seems like there's a really good relationship between entrepreneur and investor. Saumik, clearly that's the case here. Is that an important part of this recipe for you, the relationship that you have developed with FACIT?
Absolutely, Ken. That relationship piece, at least on my side, is the biggest factor, because I was reading a report recently that looked at different qualities of a VC and what distinguishes between a successful VC and a VC that maybe not performs as well. Is those successful VCs always bet on the founders. And the worst VCs bet typically on the market or the product. And I mean, they ended up doing okay in that report. But the successful VCs that stood out always bet on the founders. And I think as part of that relationship that we have with FACIT and all of our other investors that participate in our round is that relationship of trust and being able to execute when it matters the most. And I think one of the beautiful things we had with our round is that FACIT sort of saw our progress throughout the pitch competition, throughout the different milestones set out in the grant. And that, I'd like to believe, David, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that inspired some confidence in the FACIT team and why they pursued forward with the investment. And honestly, looking back now, the amount of milestones my team and I have been able to achieve was primarily based on that trust and our ability to execute as well, and having these worthwhile relationships with mentors, advisors, our investors, and even our clinical partners.
Okay, so David, yeah,
Absolutely.
talk about that because I feel like trust has got to be, right at the very top of the list of the things, the qualities that make for a successful relationship between a VC and a founder.
One of the reasons that we give out these small grants is to essentially test out these young companies to see what they can do. So we give them a bit of money. There's not a lot of strings attached to it. There are some, but we say, okay, we're going to give you this grant, see what you can do in 1 year or maybe 2 years sometimes. And then we'll see if we want to make an investment in the company. We also make investments in companies that just come straight to us looking for investment. But I really like the model where we do the grant first because it allows us to kind of build the relationship, see what they're all about, see what kind of progress they're making. And another aspect of FACIT that's maybe a bit different than a VC is that we have a mandate to nurture the biotech and medtech industries in Ontario. And part of that is to help develop local talent, to help new CEOs and fledgling companies, get on their feet and help to build the ecosystem of talented entrepreneurs who hopefully will become serial entrepreneurs and serial executives.
So, Saumik, did you get that impression that, that first grant money was a bit of a test? Like, did you feel that pressure that, okay, we're being challenged here with an opportunity that could be huge down the road?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, Ken. I would say if you ever have a chance to meet the rest of my founders, we put a lot of we set the benchmark very high for our own selves. So when we received that first grant from FACIT, for us, we didn't feel a lot of stress, but we just knew internally we need to prove this out as best as possible with clear milestones. And I think having the confidence and interest from FACIT and other investors, it just pushes us to really move this technology to the next level. And I think parts of that pressure is also built, or I don't want to call it pressure. It's more good pressure, I'd say. But parts of it is actually built on our capabilities of bringing this technology to market to benefit our patients. And I think every single night when I finish work, it's always thinking about how much further have we moved along in our commercialization journey, and how much quicker can we bring our technology so that we can equip pathology staff with the right tools to provide the best patient care. So having those two things in mind is sort of what really empowers us every day to move this along as quickly as possible.
So maybe not pressure, almost more like validation, right?
Yeah, I would say validation, maybe with a little bit of, yeah, it's not so much pressure to us. It's we enjoy it. The pressure, we thrive in it. But it's the validation for sure. That definitely helps.
So a question I want to ask both of you, and David, maybe I'll start with you first. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that founders might have when working with an investor? Is there like a common thing that you hear from innovators when they say, "Oh, I honestly didn't realize that was how this might work"?
Most of the folks that we work with who are in startup companies are usually pretty savvy. I guess the most education comes into when we're working with university professors, because we also get grant applications from professors who are trying to nucleate an idea or an invention with the idea of getting it into a startup company. And so we work with them, and we also encourage them to work with their technology transfer office at their university or hospital to help them on that first stage of the journey, which can be very challenging if you're in an academic mindset.
How about you, Saumik? Were there misconceptions that you had pre-funding?
A big part of the misconceptions that may occur between entrepreneurs and investors sometimes is not communicating properly, or not setting expectations clearly. And I think when you don't have that level of transparency no matter what stage of a company, I think that's where things can start to go wrong. And because as I mentioned, a big part of what we do is built off of trust. Being clear upfront with our milestones, the challenges that we're facing, opportunities that we have coming up, and getting feedback from our stakeholders is a big part of reducing or alleviating some of those misconceptions from even happening from the first place. Because I feel like oftentimes as entrepreneurs, there's that misconception that, oh my gosh, as soon as you have investment, you're under the gun nonstop every single time, and start stressing every night, can't sleep. I mean, you're on a timeline, but again, a big part of that stress can be alleviated when you're setting out clear expectations, and having that sort of level set understanding with all of your investors and stakeholders involved.
So I guess what I'm really trying to get at here, and David, is when it comes to that relationship, what kind of role do you think an investor should play? I mean, beyond providing the funding, or is that it? For some investors, it may simply be, here's the funding, we're out. We'll see how things play out with the results.
We tailor our approach to the experience level of the party that we're dealing with. So when you have a startup company that has competent management, even if it's the first time that they've done it, we take a fairly hands-off approach. We're available to help them with anything that they might need. Sometimes we have companies that struggle a little bit, or they're very, very green. And in the past, what we've done is occasionally we can work with them and say, hey, we would like to hire a consultant to come in and give you some advice. And we also, in the past, have used what we call executives in residence, where FACIT hires a person to be a FACIT employee and then deploys them out into the field to assist with the management and the running of the company. And we've done that a few times over the years.
So it feels like, what FACIT does that sets itself apart within the Canadian life sciences sector is that that early stage intervention to set an innovator on the right direction. Is that right, or is there something else that you think sets FACIT apart within that sector?
I think what really sets us apart is that there's very few sources of funding for technologies at this stage. So the early grants that we give are really for early commercialization, proof of principle. It's not an academic grant. So you're not going to find grants like these from the main scientific granting agencies. And then when we get to the more commercial stage, when we get to the FACIT investments, these are really seed level investments. So this is before you would normally find, for example, a venture capitalist. And there's very, very few sources for seed funding in Ontario and in Canada in general for the life sciences sector. It's different, of course, in different sectors. Computers and IT and so forth is a whole different thing. But for life sciences, there's very few sources for seed funding. And FACIT will continue to support the company through its higher funding rounds as well. Once they get a venture capitalist or an institutional strategic investor, and they do what's called like a Series A raise or a Series B funding raise, FACIT will often participate in those raises to support the company and to also help maintain our share position, because we're looking for that exit at the end so that we can recycle the money back into our fund.
So I can see a lot of head nodding from Saumik when we're talking about all of that. Speak to that then, Saumik, about the how difficult it might be to find this kind of funding.
Yeah, it's very difficult. David is not joking when he says FACIT is one of those very few organizations that invest in the early stage startups, especially in the life science and MedTech space. And just to give you some numbers, in 2023, when I was fundraising, we pitched to about 205 Canadian investors, and roughly close to 8% or 7.8%, if my math is correct, actually ended up converting to an actual investment. And again, those conversations that I used to have in 2023, again, it wasn't the best year to fundraise, I will say, because the markets weren't the best, but finding those individuals who actually have a good understanding of MedTech and the life sciences space was really important for us, because even the investors that also joined, that joined our cap table, are investors that were medical device engineers in the past, have built medical device businesses. So finding those strategic investors are very tough in Canada. And FACIT is one of those very, very few organizations that actually makes early stage investments. And without FACIT investment, we would not be here today.
So, David, do you see that landscape within the Canadian life sciences ecosystem changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, I sure hope so. Right now, it remains fairly steady. There's not a lot of risk capital out there for really early med tech and biotech innovation. And part of that is the risk profile. You have technologies that take a long time to get to market, and they're quite risky. And the earlier you invest, the more risk you take. So it often is very difficult for private organizations that are sort of returns driven, like venture capital and private capital. It's difficult for them to make a case to invest in these really, really early ventures. So FACIT, as I mentioned before, has sort of a multi-pronged mandate where we need to also nurture the local ecosystem and help develop local entrepreneurs. So we're not solely driven by return on investment. We're a not-for-profit type of organization, although we're structured as a company. We don't take a profit the way a venture capitalist would. So we can sort of afford to take these big risks on these early ventures.
So then, David, considering the risk and considering how difficult it is for these innovators to find the funding, what advice would you give to a founder, specifically who is looking to build a long-term, growthful, impactful relationship?
I'd say hit your milestones, set realistic expectations and realistic timelines. A lot of times these early companies, they set very aggressive timelines with very aggressive budgets that turn out to be not really realistic, and then they end up missing missing milestones, missing goals, missing their budget. They end up falling short of cash months before they were expecting to, and then they're scrambling to try to find sources of cash to meet their payroll. So I'd say keep the expectations realistic, don't overpromise, and hit those milestones.
So, Saumik, I want to ask you the same question, but we also like to wrap up the podcast with a kind of a unique question that I think will answer this as well, which is, if you could go back in time, even before you had, started on this journey, and give yourself one piece of advice, whether it relates to, building that relationship with funding or anything. What piece of advice would you give yourself that might have made this journey a little bit easier?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken. I honestly, I wouldn't change anything that we've done. My team and I, we've been so proficient with all the different activities that we took on. I think the biggest thing is just revalidating myself that building that relationship and trust early on is super, super important. And we're just so grateful we were able to build that relationship with David and his team at FACIT just during those early days, and just being able to surgically maneuver as we start reaching the commercialization process. I would say I agree with David that under promising, over delivering is a big motto that my team and I share all the time. So exercising that judgment in any decision you make is very helpful. And the third part is my team and I have done this really well. Oftentimes in the field that we're in, it's so innovative with what we're building. So you may not have all the data points. And sometimes if you have 50% of those data points, reaching out to mentors, to your investors, having those open, transparent communications can oftentimes provide you with additional data points that can help you make an informed decision on certain milestones that you plan to hit. And I would say those would be the key points for me if I were to go back in time.
Well, it seems like you both have an enviable relationship that I think a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of investors would look at and go, that's the kind of relationship I would like to have with an investor or with an entrepreneur. I thank you both for joining me on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. It's been a pleasure.
Idea to Investment is sponsored by TD Ferreira Wealth Advisory Group and is made possible by Tech Alliance of Southwestern Ontario. If you'd like to learn more about Tech Alliance and the resources available to entrepreneurs and startups, go to techalliance.ca. My name is Ken Eastwood. Thank you so much for joining me.